slides, and people have been asking when are we going to have a science talk. We have a science talk. And I'm excited for this science talk because this is a science talk that's also about global action and change, which is exciting to me. So Bradley Lusk is a member of our community, but he's also a research professional in the field of microbial electrochemistry, which I'm sure he will explain to us, and a former small business owner. After earning his doctorate degree in biological design from Arizona State University in 2015, he embarked on a year-long mission to tell a narrative of science as a force for collaborative global action through the blog at www.sciencetheearth.com. To tell this narrative, he visited over 70 research institutions, businesses, and scientifically significant locations in greater than 30 countries. He is currently involved in a biotech startup to remediate precious metals from contaminated water sources and hopes to use his passion for science to encourage others to join the narrative of science. So Science the Earth is his topic and his project that he's going to be sharing with us today. So again, in 2016, he embarked on a self-funded mission to bridge cultures through science and human discovery titled Science the Earth. For this mission, he is visiting innovators, entrepreneurs, and game changers around the world to tell a narrative of how logic and innovation unite our planet in a quest for knowledge. By sharing his research and the research of universities and industries, he helps to inspire current and upcoming generations to participate in this narrative. At this event, he will divulge some interesting stories from the road, including visiting and lecturing in over 70 research institutions, universities, elementary schools, public events located in countries from Pakistan to Israel to India and all over the European Union. He will discuss his recent trip to over 30 states, including visits to Harvard, the Naval Research Laboratory, and the March for Science in Washington, D.C. And he will conclude with a discussion of his motivations and efforts for introducing science to a broad global audience, and by emphasizing the importance of science as a driver for empathy and positive social action. Join him as we science one individual, one community, one Earth at a time. Bradley Lusk.
Okay, good. Can you all hear me? Yes. All right, so just two things real quick. First thing is I'm probably going to go pretty much to the end or maybe a little over. And so I understand if you have a tight schedule and need to leave at 11:30 if you start leaving. And then also I will be at the lunch today, so you can ask me all the questions you want there, because I'm sure what I'm going to talk about today is going to lead you to have a lot of questions that you want to ask me. So this title slide has all of my information on it, and you've had now almost 30 minutes to look at it, so I'm not going to spend any more time on it. So I'm going to briefly start out with my website. So how can you navigate my website? Because I'm sure after the talk you're going to want to go back to it and check it out and read some of my other blogs. I also have business cards up here, a whole stack of them, so if you're interested, please get one at lunch or walk up and get one after on your way out, wherever. Actually, I can leave them on the table or something, so if you have to leave, actually I'll put them over here on the piano. So if you have to leave early for whatever reason, that way you don't have to come up to the podium and have everyone stare at you awkwardly. Okay, so my website is sciencetheearth.com, and kind of the way that it works is your landing page is going to be the most recent news article. So this is the most recent blog that I've written. And then if you hover, and the way that I make my news articles is I visit research institutions and labs around the world. I actually physically talk with the students or the professors that work there. So up here is me in Vietnam, this is me in Singapore, these are some researchers in Australia, and you can see they kind of have their bioreactors behind them. So I'll highlight the researchers, I'll highlight the research institution that it's happening at, and then I'll also briefly talk about some of the research that they're doing. And this is kind of a way to introduce not only the science itself, but the people who are doing it, right? The people who are engaged in the act of science. So then you can come back, so after I do that, I'll come back and I'll write a news section. So for example, this is one of the people that I talked to in Israel, and this is her with her reactors. And there's a whole kind of write-up on her and what she's doing in Tel Aviv. If you go to the news section and you hover over it, you can see that this little button will pop up that says archive. If you go to the archive section, you can read all of the blogs that I've written so far. There's a little over 50, I think, at this point. And so every single place that I've been to, every single blog that I've written so far, you can click that link and it'll take you directly to it. If you go to the map page, I have the map page linked up to my Instagram account. So every time I upload a picture to Instagram, it has a little geotag on it, and it automatically pops up onto this map. And it's the last 30 pictures I've taken. So you can see the last 30 places that I visited, and that'll update in real time. So this map looks a lot different now since I've been to the United States, but at the time that I took this, these were the last 30 pictures I had taken. If you go to the About page, that's where you can learn a little bit more about Science Earth. You can learn a little bit more about me. You can read some of the research that I've done, and kind of this stuff like that gives you a basic idea. If you go to the Schedule tab, you can see all the places I've been when I've been there. And all of the green that you see, these are all links. So if you click that link, it'll either take you to the blog I've written about that location, or it'll take you to the website of that location, because I haven't written a blog yet. And these blogs take me a while. There's a lot to them. They're very dense. And then the contact information. So if you're inspired today by this talk and you would like me to come give a talk, I go to elementary schools all over, and I will definitely cater my talk to the audience that I'm giving it to you. So I would not give the same talk that I'm giving you today to an elementary school. And if there are any kids here, there are a few expletives in this talk, just so you know. You have the opportunity to leave now. Yeah, your guardian has the opportunity to escort you out. And if you go to the Science tab, you can learn a little bit more about the science that I'm doing with microbial electrochemistry. And I've kind of written this to be very simplified so that even someone who has never seen this technology or this research before can get at least somewhat of a grasp of what it is that's happening with this research and why we're doing it. And so I'm going to briefly talk about the research that I do, and then I'm going to get into some stories from the road. And so the research that I do using microbial electrochemistry is we have these devices. This is, one way of looking at, this is one way of constructing it, this is a different way of constructing it. So these two devices do the same thing. What these devices are doing is, they're called microbial electrochemical cells. We're delivering wastewater into what's called the anode compartment. And in the anode compartment, there are bacteria that survive by eating waste and breathing metals. So in these batteries, we can replace insoluble metal, what would be like iron in the environment, with an anode, so a carbon graphite rod. And so now what you're doing is you're essentially using microorganisms to convert food waste and the energy in food waste into an electrical current in a battery. So they're kind of like a living catalyst, if you will. And if you want to read about that, there's a bunch of publications that you can read. They're all on my website. You can go check those out. And so I have another talk coming up next week for all of you who are interested in some science that's going on in a cave here in Grand Canyon Caverns. It's located in Peach Springs, Arizona. So on November 25th, there's going to be a talk about microbes living in a dry cave here, 220 feet under the ground. And as it say, it will be a night of beer, wine, and science in a cave. I'm really excited because I have a room down in this cave that you can actually rent out. And they're giving me that room for the night for free. And in this room is a turntable. And so I plan to listen to Black Sabbath in a cave while talking about science. It's going to be awesome. So I encourage you all to come and check that out. All right, so the trip, Science to Earth. How did this all start? What is it? Well, it all starts in Vegas. So I'm going to show you some maps. Whenever I'm going from one location to another, I'm going to try to give you a map just so we can kind of like geographically wrap our heads around it. So it all starts in Las Vegas. So it's probably 2014, something like that. I'm sitting in the lab. I have my hands in this contraption that we call a glove box, which is essentially something that you would see on like a space station or something where you have to work in this chamber. And I'm putting these reactors together, and two students from the lab, two students that I haven't really talked to very much, come up to me. And they say, hey, Brad. They knew my name because I was wearing my badge that day. I had my name tag on. They said, hey, Brad, we wanted to go to Las Vegas. This is our last weekend in town. And our driver dropped out at the last minute. Would you be willing to drive us to Las Vegas? And of course, me being the grad student that I was, trying to wrap up my dissertation, get all my research done, I said, yeah, sure, why not? Let's go to Las Vegas. And so one of the students was from India and the other one was from Pakistan, and I felt compelled, I felt obligated to take them for one last weekend of American debauchery in Las Vegas. So we went. While in Las Vegas, I got to know these two students. One of them, her name was Shilpi, and the other one, his name was Kesar. And while we were in Las Vegas, you know, we had a lot of fun. Shilpi tried tequila for the first time, you know, and she eventually said, hey, Brad, you know, you're actually really cool. I would love for you to come to India and go to my wedding to my husband. And I was like, well, oh, okay, like, why not? A wedding in India, an Indian wedding in India? Like, who would say no to that? And then Kessler says, hey, Brad, you know, India and Pakistan share a land border. Why don't you just come over to Pakistan, too? And I was like, well, yeah, you know, the plane ticket's so expensive. I'm already there. Why not? Let's do it. So next thing I know, I'm flying from Las Vegas to India. And the wedding was in this little town called Farrukhabad, which is a town that no one will ever go to unless you're going to a wedding in India. As someone who grew up in Farrukhabad. And here I am at, this is a typical Indian wedding, right? Very colorful. And so I go to this Indian wedding and we have a great time and I experience India and there's tons of stories to tell from India. But that's for another time. This was one of the last places I went to in India. So this is called the Golden Temple, and this is in a city that's really close to the border between India and Pakistan. So this temple is very significant to the Sikh religion. So this is like the Mecca for Islam. This is like the Mecca for Sikhs, the Golden Temple. So everyone that is involved in this religion should go there at least one time. They're like, hey, Brad, you should go there because it's right next to the border and it's super beautiful. And so I go here, and sure enough, I loved it, super beautiful. But now I'm done going to the temple, and I need to figure out how am I going to get from Amritsar, which is here in the north part of India, to Lahore. This is about 50 kilometers. And so, let me just stay here. So, the way that you get from Amritsar to Lahore is that usually you get on a bus, a tour bus. So tourists go to the border between India and Pakistan every day, but they don't cross it. The reason they go to the border is because in India and Pakistan, every day, they have the raising and the lowering of the Indian and Pakistani flags. And so during these moments, all the tourists on the India side go to India and talk about how India is the best country in the world. And all the people from Pakistan and tourists, however many they have, go to the Pakistani side, and they talk about how Pakistan is the best country in the world. And so I'm done with the Golden Temple, and I'm looking for a way to get there, and I go up to the travel agency, and I say, hey, I would like to get a trip to go to the Wagah border, to go into Pakistan. And they say, no, we're not doing any trips. You have to go in the morning or the evening. The bus is going to be leaving in about 5 or 6 hours. And I said, no, I don't want to go for the raising and lowering of the flag. I want to go there to go into Pakistan. I only want a one-way trip. And this is a very hard concept for Indians to grasp, the fact that you just want to go to the border on a one-way trip. And so I eventually have to call a cab driver. Cab driver shows up, figure out it's actually not the cab driver I called, it's just some other cab driver that saw me looking confused on the side of the road. I had to negotiate with him for about 5 minutes to try to convince him that yes, it was actually Pakistan where I wanted to go and I didn't want a return trip, and he just looked like really pale and in his face he's like, seriously? And so Before I got in the cab, the people that I was staying with in India said, hey, when you get a cab driver, just call us and have him send a picture of his license so that we can confirm that he is a real cab driver. And so I did that, gave him the phone. I could hear them going on for another 5 to 10 minutes about whether or not I was sane for doing this. And then we got into the cab and we were on our way. And so this is where we pull out. Now we pulled out onto the 50-kilometer road to go from India to Pakistan. And the first thing I see is this kind of military presence is already starting to show up. And as we drive down, now we can see there's a barracks here. And there's a big sign when you enter the barracks that says, "Fortune favors the brave," right? So now I'm like super pumped. I'm like, great, this is such a fortunate trip for me. I cannot wait to get into Pakistan. And so this is what the road looks like. This is what the road looks like when you're between India and Pakistan. A lot less threatening than I thought it would look like. It just looks like a nice, green, lush forest. And so this is, as I'm getting close. So you can see the border is now 2 kilometers away. Lahore, which is the major city I'm going to, is 24 kilometers away. And so as I'm going closer and closer and closer to the border, I'm thinking more and more and more about not only the email that my mom sent me a few days prior, begging me to please reconsider and not go. It's like, Mom, I already bought the plane ticket, I already went to the wedding, I'm already got the visa, I'm too far in, I gotta go. And then there's the travel warning. So let me read you a little excerpt from the travel warning issued by the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States. Excerpt, okay. So it says, Pakistan continues to experience significant terrorist violence, including sectarian attacks. Throughout Pakistan, foreign and indigenous terrorist groups continue to pose a danger to U.S. citizens. Targeted attacks against government officials, humanitarian, and non-governmental organizations.
It's not that.
It's not that. Oh, it's because I'm close to this. Okay, I'm walking over here. Okay. And non-governmental organizations or NGOs, employees, tribal elders, and law enforcement personnel are common. Evidence suggests that some victims of terrorist activity have been targeted because they are Americans. Terrorists and criminal groups regularly resort to kidnapping for ransom, which explained the taxi thing to me later. I was like, oh yeah, okay. Terrorists have targeted heavily guarded facilities such as military installations and airports, universities, schools, and hospitals, places of worship of various faiths, rallies, public parks, and sports venues, and large marketplaces in several Pakistani cities. Okay. So that's all going through my head as I'm reading these signs. And then we get up to the Pakistani border. So you get up to the Pakistani border, and the first thing you see is a barrier, military guy, barrier, military guy, barrier, military guy. I'm like, awesome, cool. So I'm walking up towards this third guy, and the third guy's the guy who checks your passport. He's over here. And I have this big coat on, which you'll see later. I have this big coat on, and I have my full beard going, and I'm kind of like incognito mode, It's like no one needs to know I'm from America unless they need to know I'm from America. So I go up to this guy, and I'm like, he's like, okay, passport? And I'm like, okay, and I'm reaching in my pocket, and I pull it out, and he goes, oh, you're American. And I go, yeah. And he goes, and you're going to Pakistan? And I go, yeah. And he goes, for tourism? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, all right. And I threw the passport back, and I'm on my way into the building. And so this is an interesting part of this whole story is, okay, so now I'm on my way into the actual building, and it's essentially like, when you're going to get on an airplane and you have to pass all of your luggage through, the X-ray scanner thing. And so I'm going there to visit the lab where Kesser's working. And of course, the reason I met Kesser is because he was in my lab here in ASU doing the same research that I was doing, which means that he wanted me to bring him one of the reactors that he had been using so that he could finish his dissertation. And so you have to imagine, there was no liquid in it at the time, but this is in my bag, right?
Was it ticking?
Was not ticking, but it's 2 glass jars clamped together with wires coming out of him. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking like, okay, I gotta get my story right. I'm sitting there planning, I got everything planned out. I'm like, okay, I'm ready for my story. I'm ready for when they find this thing. And so I go over to the thing, and they say, oh, no, don't bother, don't put it in the x-ray. And I'm like, okay, I mean, I don't know why you have it, but okay. So I'm not gonna ask any questions. So then I put it on the table, and they're like, okay, we're gonna go through it, is that okay? And I'm like, sure. So they take out one sweater, and I'm thinking like, all right, I'm all ready. I got my speech ready. It's gonna be good. 2 sweaters. And I'm like, all right, it's not too far, and it's like halfway through, and he's like, then he puts one sweater back, another sweater back. It's like, okay, you're cool. I'm like, really? All that speech, everything? Okay, fine. So I get on the bus. So now the next thing you do is after you leave the India border check, you get on a bus because they don't let you walk. And then they bus you up. So this is what the bus looks like. And they bus you up to the border. So this is where you would sit in the bleachers to watch the raising and lowering of the flag on the India side. I'm pretty sure that's still India side. Then here's the Pakistani border, and then they have the Pakistani side over there, right? My favorite part of this picture is this dog. Because I just had to go through all this crap to get to this border, and this dog just runs back and forth between the borders like every day, all day, just to troll everyone. So this is me at the Pakistani border. This is a gentleman that was right in front of me in line. And the reason that I know that this was a gentleman right in front of me in line is I had to wait 45 minutes for this gentleman to get through the line because his passport was from a country that they wasn't sure was actually even a real country. I can't remember the name of the country, but it was some small island country. But yeah, so this is me. This is my beard. This is me incognito mode. This is my coat, and my passport's like in here somewhere. And so after I get to the Pakistani side, I check through. Again, it's the same thing. They don't really check my bag. They don't really care. And I get out, and here I'm expecting to meet Kesar, my friend. And instead I meet this guy. No idea who this guy is. He's just some guy with a cart and a smile, and he's just telling me to put my bag on this cart, and I have no idea what's going on. But I'm like, all right, well, I don't see any cars. So I put my bag on this cart, and then we just start walking down this road. And I'm like, okay, I don't know where we're going. I don't know what's going on. I'm looking, and it's just like this huge open road, no one on it, these chain link fences with barbed wire. This is my first experience in Pakistan. I'm sitting here trying to call Kesar, and I can't because my India phone card immediately goes dead in Pakistan. Immediately, no good. And so I have to convince this guy who doesn't speak any English. I mean, there's a lot that you can do, I learned during my travels. There's a lot that you can do by just going like, you know, just smile and wave. And so anyway, he ends up calling Kesar, and we figure out, okay, he can't pick me up where he thought he was going to be able to pick me up. So I'm there in February, and in November there was actually a car bomb, a suicide blast, right in the area where Kesar was going to pick me up. And now you have to walk a kilometer to get to the closest car. And this guy was just some guy that was trying to get a bribe. That's all who he was. And so I eventually met up with Kesar, and here we are in Pakistan. So this is what a typical road looks like in Pakistan. And here's me in Pakistan. So this is what I mean by kind of incognito mode. So this is an individual from a northern region in Pakistan, right? This is me. So until I open my mouth and say, hello, right? No one really knows. This is me wearing a traditional Pakistani hat from that region that he's from, right? So almost indistinguishable, which I was quite okay with. By the way, I had to remind Kesar while we were there. So this is my friend Kesar. I had to remind Kesar while we were there. I'm like, this is 2014, right? This is like the height of ISIS and all the online social networking stuff. I'm like, could you please not tag me in any photos in Facebook until I leave? No one needs to know where I am right now. But anyway, so yeah, so this is Kesar and I. And we visited some really beautiful mosques in Pakistan. And we also visited some really cool looking ruins. I like to show this picture because it looks like I went to Pakistan and joined a black metal band. And yeah, so to go out and see all this stuff, we had to rent a car. And so to rent a car, we had to go to we had to drive from campus. So campus was probably about 20 kilometers away, 20 or 30 kilometers away from downtown. So we had to take a cab to downtown, and then from downtown we got a rental car, and then we could drive out to all these places. And so this is, after we were done going to these places, we came back to town. So this is what town looks like on a Saturday night, right? So this is downtown, I think this is either Islamabad or Lahore. Now it's escaping me, but this is downtown Lahore, we'll say on a Saturday night. And there's no drinking in Lahore. And so what do you do if you can't get a drink on a Saturday night? Well, you might go to an IMAX, or you might go to a Burger King. And Burger King is like the happening place. Look at this line. This is like insane, right? So kind of the moral of the story here is that Lahore or Islamabad is actually fairly westernized. And what do you do there? Like we went to another ice cream parlor. It was just ice cream and Americana. And so like pictures of Elvis and Kurt Cobain and Marilyn Monroe, you know, like this is the kind of stuff that you do in Pakistan, right? Or go to a restaurant and just hang out with your friends. Everything but drink, so you know the right people. So this is a picture of us on the way back from town. So we took a cab to town, got a rental car, came back to town, and then had to take a cab back to our room. And so now we're trying to get a cab at night. And the way that the culture works in India and Pakistan is that you have to barter over literally everything. And so we're in the middle of the road at night trying to get a car back, and Kessler absolutely will not accept a car that costs any more than the equivalent of $3 American to go 30 kilometers one way. And so we eventually do find a cab after about 30, 45 minutes, somewhere in there. I don't know, it seemed like forever in the streets of Lahore at night. But we eventually do find a cab that will take us back for that price. What do we have to sacrifice for that price? This is a picture of us in the cab driving down the highway. So the little issue that this cab had was that if he turned his headlights on, the car turned off. So his solution to the problem was just drive it without the headlights. Why not? So this is us driving down the highway, you know, going about, let's say about maybe 85 kilometers an hour, somewhere around there. So I don't know, somewhere in 60, you know, what you drive on the highway here. Okay, that's what it looks like when an oncoming car is pretty far off in the distance. And that's what it looks like when an oncoming car on a two-lane highway is getting really close to you. That's what it looks like when it's about to kill you. That's what it looks like when you're crapping your pants. And that's what it looks like when it narrowly misses you, right? So all of this to save. So we paid $3 American. The average cab was about $4 American. So all of this to save $1.
Wow.
Incredible. So here we are on the campus in Pakistan, one of the campuses. This is a private university in Pakistan called LUMS. Yeah, you can see it just looks like a normal campus, normal students. You know, we just had a talk about Islam a few weeks ago in here, and you can see in Pakistan it really depends on your level of wealth, right? So if you're well-to-do in a private university, and you're a woman, you can decide whether or not you want to wear a hijab, or whether or not you want to wear jeans, or whether or not you want to sit with other men, right? So this is culturally taboo in a lot of places. Like in India, for example, that would also be culturally taboo, but not as. And in Pakistan, it's definitely culturally taboo to sit with men and women at the same place at lunch. But you can see that it does happen, depending on where you are and depending on your income level. This is one of the classrooms at this university, right? Looks a lot like a classroom at Arizona State University. This is a lab at the Lahore University, right? So this is now the public university. This is a research lab in there. It looks not so different from research labs at universities in the United States. So this is me giving a seminar then in Pakistan at this university to the microbiology department. This is the first seminar I ever gave while I was traveling to a university. This was before Science Earth ever existed. This was just me saying, yeah, let's do it for the hell of it, why not? So this is the microbiology department in that university. And the interesting thing about this picture, as you might notice, is it's primarily all women, right? So in Pakistan, also in India, this region of the world, biology is actually considered more of a feminine science. And so they joke about the chemistry students, because the chemistry students are primarily male and they don't have the same ventilation that we do here, and so they joke about how all of the chemistry majors are sterile from the lack of ventilation. But after I gave this presentation, you know, I looked at this audience and I said, I just want to let you all know that this may be a feminine science, but you are the people who are going to be in charge of Pakistan, because I'm biased. You are the people that are going to be in charge of Pakistan, because the 21st century is the century for biology. Like, this is your century. This is where all the technology is now. So I thought that was a really interesting phenomenon to see. So really, what is it that brought me to this lab? What brought me to this lab is a student that was studying at ASU, working on reactors that look like this. And they may not be as sophisticated, but they're very, very, very similar. It's essentially the same thing to the reactors that are going on in the United States of America. And so we ended up then taking the research that we did together when we published. So here's me and here's Kessar. And this is actually now in a research journal called Environmental Science and Technology, which is a well-respected research journal within the field. And this kind of collaboration between these two countries happened because of this narrative that we had to share about how we were kind of committing to scientific innovation together. But also, this happened out of a consequence of us being able to come together despite our different countries, despite our different backgrounds, despite our completely different cultural understanding of the world, right? And having the empathy with one another to understand each other enough to be able to bring this all together. And so coming back from this trip really got me thinking about kind of some of the interconnectedness of the world. And, excuse me, I'm going to get a drink real quick. I'll leave this here. So it got me thinking about the interconnectedness of the world and the idea that, first of all, what is it? There's a lot more to this story than just the science. But also, there is a lot to this story about science that we don't really hear. So science is already kind of bringing together these different cultures to enact solutions into the world. And so now I'm going to read. Now this is the first time I've ever done this. So I picked out a select few blogs that I wrote to read to this audience. So I picked out ones that I thought you'd be particularly interested in, for better or for worse. And these are kind of the thoughts that I was going through at the time. And so this one, what was I thinking about? This was actually from shortly after I left for my trip. I started to think about, okay, what is it that went on in my head to kind of get me to be going on this trip, where I'm like sending all these cold emails to all these people and seeing all these people that I know in all these places. And so this is from October 25th of 2016 from a blog called Motivation, Marseille, Toulouse, Avignon, and Lyon in France. Okay. So, it says, Science to Earth is our journey to discover global human collaboration that is catalyzing positive social change through logic and human discovery. Science to Earth is a narrative of our innate ability to empathize with one another for the sake of elevating humanity. Science to Earth is the realization that global collaboration and positive change is not a question of if or when. Global collaboration is already happening. Individuals are currently enacting positive social change, and you can play an active role in that social change. If we are to realize ourselves to our fullest potential, we must first understand who it is we are as individuals. Step one is to think. Really think. Think about who it is you are and where it is you are. Is this where you want to be? Is this where you want to go? To have direction in life and to have purpose, we must first understand the person who seeks such a purpose. And for this, we must first understand ourselves. To set a goal of where it is I want to be and where it is I want to go, I must first take the time to understand and ponder these questions. Without pondering them, I am little more than a hapless wanderer, directionless. However, to wander with these questions in mind and to seek to discover the answers is the very practice of empiricism. It is our journey to self-discovery. It is the ultimate act of science. Through this quandary, we will come to understand more of who it is we are as individuals. Once we begin to understand who it is we are, then we begin to understand what it is we have to provide to this narrative. And once we know what it is we can provide, then we can contribute ourselves to our fullest capacity. Purpose. When I start talking about the word purpose, people often get frustrated. People proclaim that they feel that everybody tells them they have purpose, and their lack of ability to find any makes them anxious and defensive. However, to not have purpose is a basic human condition. Purpose is not bestowed upon us, it is something we must find for ourselves. If we lack purpose and lack passion, the worst thing we can do is allow ourselves to become distracted by externalities. The world is full of distractions for the passionless. We are convinced to purchase satisfaction, to be passionate about our houses, our cars, our clothes. We hold grand balls where we display useless disposable commodities, where we do little more than discuss externalities, discuss distractions, and we are convinced that discussing those distractions is that for which we should be passionate. Industry understands our vulnerability and exploits our lack of passion to sell us things we do not need, things we purchase in the fleeting hope of somehow, wrapped in plastic, we will find our great purpose, only to throw it away and buy a new passion the next day. Purpose is not a purchase, and passion is not a brand. I understand the frustration people feel when they are told to have a purpose. But what if we were to look at purpose from a different perspective? What if our purpose was self-discovery? What if we used all the time we spent worrying about our lack of purpose, instead thinking about who it is we are? Purpose is a manifestation of our self-discovery. Once we begin to ask the question of who we are and where we are going, we begin to realize the self. And as individuals with self-awareness, we can start to apply purpose to our actions. Once we grant ourselves the liberty of being selfish, then our desires to act in self-destructive ways disappears. Once we grant ourselves this liberty, then we begin to discover ourselves as our purpose. Self-actualization, enlightenment, nirvana, call it what you will, the path to transcendence comes with self-discovery. Well, thank you. Oh, I forgot to show you all the pictures. Well, anyway, okay. So this was supposed to be playing in the back. So that was Minnesota. That was France. That was Clemson. Penn State. I'll do this better next time. Like I said, this is my first time doing this. Amherst. So all of these pictures are meant to give you this kind of idea, this vision of how many people are involved in this kind of process. So this idea now of science as this collaborative phenomenon. There's Bogota, Auckland, Queensland, Vietnam, elementary school I went to in Mumbai, India. Okay. So, then I got thinking a lot about motivation. So, this is kind of the second half of this blog is motivation. So, how many of you have seen this before? Good. I love to hear that. So, this is called Maslow's hierarchy of needs for those of you who haven't heard of it. And so, basically what this is, a guy sat down and he just thought about what is it that motivates me and what is it that I think motivates humanity to do things. And when he was done thinking about it, he put it into this pyramid. Basically what this pyramid says is what motivates us at the most fundamental level is things like breathing and food and water. And once we kind of get these motivating factors figured out, then we can eventually get to being morally creative, spontaneous people. And so now I'll read you the second half of this excerpt while I do the pictures correctly. Okay, so to put ourselves in a situation where we can self-discover, we must understand what it is that motivates us. Maslow's hierarchy of needs informs us that we must attain certain physiological and emotional needs before we can attain self-actualization. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a philosophical quandary so influential that since its publication in 1954 has averaged nearly 2 citations every single day. Looking at this philosophy, we understand that our primary motivating is breathing, food, water, things which are essential for human lives. These are also the same things that lions and bears fight over. These elements appeal to our most ancient brain, the part of our brain that tells us that if we do not eat, we will die, and if we do not have sex, we will not procreate. These are the same elements industry implores us to consume. Corporations, mass production, uninhibited crony capitalism, whatever you want to call it, all implore us to desire no further than our basic animal instincts. If we never take the time to think beyond these motivations, if we never take time to turn off the television or our personalized news feeds, if we never take the time to look beyond advertising, then we will never attain self-actualization. For those of us that have the liberty to look beyond these basic needs, for those of us who live in lands of plenty, it is essential that we transcend this basic level of motivation. As we move beyond focusing on the externalities of a consumer world, we start to realize things like safety, love, wholeness, esteem, and an essential sense of self. And once we achieve that sense of self, once we take the time to think, we understand who it is we are and what it is we have to offer. And then we can enact positive social change, and we can become positive social actors. And with this realization, we can see how the elevation of humanity depends upon our ability to self-actualize. The more people who are aware of self, the more people who are contributing positively to their communities. For this reason, I've dedicated my life to helping provide access to people who lack these basic human needs. I've dedicated my life to providing access to clean drinking water and sustainable energy for those who do not have the liberty to think beyond what are they going to eat tonight, what are they going to drink tonight, and where are they going to sleep tonight. I've dedicated my life to helping impoverished communities realize their potential to move past the cycle of poverty, to engage them with the tools they need to self-actualize, and to encourage them to think. An earth with citizens that understands who it is they are is an earth that can self-actualize. A community with positive social actors is a community that will transcend the status quo. A community that will realize what it is to love, to empathize, to work and act creatively as a community of positive actors. We will elevate our minds, encourage ourselves to think, and will engage each other with compassion and understanding. My motivation is to practice the ultimate artistry of science, to think, to encourage you to think, and to grant you an avenue to self-discovery. Science bridges gaps between countries and religions. Our expression of science is an expression of our passions to assemble solutions with others, and for this, science can be our vector to self-discovery. Okay, so coming back now from Pakistan to the United States, having kind of, started parsing some of this stuff out in my mind, like, what am I doing? What's my role? Where am I going? I decided, okay, what I want to do is this kind of international world tour where I visit all of these labs around the world and I talk about science and also talk about empathy. And much to my surprise, the different labs that I would contact, I would give them the options. I could give this lecture or that lecture. In about half of the labs that I went to, even ones where I had never visited the lab before or even met the person in person, they said, give the talk about empathy. We get enough talks about science. And I was like, wow, okay, cool. I would love to. And as I was going along this trip and on this tour, I started to realize that I actually loved giving the talk about empathy a lot more than I loved giving the talk about science. And so I came back, and first thing I needed to do was defend my dissertation, so I did. And I put that on YouTube if you want to go see it. Then I graduated, so here's me, I graduated with my advisors. And then I was about ready to leave, and a really interesting event came up. So ASU holds these events around Darwin's birthday called the Darwin Day Lectures. And some people from the Humanist Society were there. I can't remember who it was. Sorry. If it was you, raise your hand. I'm giving you the opportunity to take credit for something. But they said, I just happened to sit next to them and said, hey, we're from the Humanist Society. You should check us out on Meetup. We have these really interesting events going on. And I said, okay, whatever, yeah, I'll put it on Meetup. That sounds really fun, actually. I thought it was really interesting what was going on. And so I heard the next event coming up was the Humanist Experience with Sarah Blaine and Evan Clark. And I'm like, oh, what are they doing? Well, they're traveling around the world and they're doing a podcast. Well, they're traveling around the United States. They're doing a podcast about people that are in kind of interesting situations, like, you know, women at abortion clinics and stuff like that with protesters out. And I'm like, wow, this seems like a good talk to go to. I could get some tips and tricks on how to travel the world, visit people, and still manage to maintain a blog, because I get so caught up in like doing all the fun stuff that sometimes it's hard for me to get back and do the work. And so I went to this talk, and interestingly, so what did this turn into? So I went to visit to get some tips and tricks on how to do travel the world. And at the time, I was on the programming board for Phoenix Comic-Con for the science tracks that we do. For those of you who don't know what Phoenix Comic-Con is, Phoenix Comic-Con is kind of a pop culture event that happens in Phoenix once a year, where you can kind of come and live out whatever fantasy you want through cosplay. This is actually one of my biggest fans. This fan actually gave me the name Dr. Poop, which is, I wrote on my blog, it's on the bottom of every website. It says, I will forever know you as Dr. Poop. This was after my talks at Comic-Con. And these are some of the people that I worked with at Comic-Con with Real-Time Steam, and so, you know, coming as Futurama. So this is the kind of event, that's going on there at Phoenix Comic-Con. It's just people that are coming out, kind of geeking out, having a good time. But in the science tracks, we try to have, you know, hard science-based panels. This last year we had 64, and so people can kind of 64 or more, so people kind of get an insight onto the hard science behind some of the sci-fi that they're interested in. And so after coming to this event here at the Humanist Society and talking to these individuals, Sarah and Eric, right? Evan, sorry, Evan. Sarah and Evan. After talking to Sarah and Evan, I said, hey, I'm doing this thing at Comic-Con, and I would love to have you guys come out and do a panel and potentially do a podcast about Comic-Con. This is kind of a weird event. And they're like, yeah, that sounds great. And so now we've done these panels 2 years running. And so there's some people on these slides that you might recognize. Okay, so there's, you know, Andrew Sherwood's in there, Juan Mendez, Athena Salmon, Corey Harris, who came today, and then Sarah is in there. And Evan was just on support, so he wasn't on the stage. But he was there, I promise you, he was there for moral support. Okay, so that's how I know the Humanist Society. That's kind of how I ended up here on this stage, and that's kind of a lot of how the stories go in Science Earth, is I just kind of meet people at different events, and then all of a sudden people are at Comic-Con, and I'm on a stage 2 years later giving a talk to you all, right? So now I'm going to leave. I'm going to leave from my world tour. I've developed the website. I kind of have it in mind. I've set up my first few lab visits. I've done a few lab visits, and now I'm in Greece. Okay, so I've gone through a lot of EU territory. And a lot of you may know Greece or Athens for the presence of the Parthenon, right, on the Acropolis. And what I'm trying to do is go from Greece, from Athens, Greece, to 3 cities in Egypt. I want to go to Cairo, Alexandria, and Luxor. And so some of you may know Alexandria from the Library of Alexandria, which there is one that's there now. It's been rebuilt, and it looks really awesome. And also, so a lot of you may know Cairo from the nearby Sphinx and pyramids. And so while I was in Greece, I was trying to figure out how is it that I'm going to go from Cairo to Tel Aviv in Israel. And I figured, you know, Cairo to Tel Aviv isn't going to be that big of a deal. Like, look at that flight. It's so short, you know. So, yeah, a lot of you probably know that Israel doesn't exactly get along very well with a lot of countries in the Middle East. So this is my story of how I was going to book a flight from Cairo to Israel. Oh, I also want to say before I move on to Chris, we may have the rover at Comic-Con. You may get to ride it this year.
Yes!
Okay. I put a little note here to remind you. Okay, so here we go. So traveling to Israel was such a joy, particularly finding a direct flight from Cairo, Egypt to Tel Aviv, Israel. As you may or may not know, Israel does not get along well with Arab nations. Because of this, booking a direct flight online was nearly impossible. Let me tell you how I was to book a direct flight from Cairo, Egypt to Tel Aviv, Israel. First, I searched for flights from Cairo to Tel Aviv through an online flight search engine. Flying from such close proximity, I figured finding a direct flight would be a simple endeavor. Not so. The cheapest flight was almost 8 hours and mandated that I make a layover in Jordan. The shortest flight was almost 6 hours and required that I travel through Istanbul, which is this one. However, I noticed that if I booked the flight from Alexandria, Egypt to Tel Aviv, Israel, no direct flights were available, but there was a flight available from Alexandria to Cairo to Tel Aviv, Israel. That's odd, I thought. I can book a flight online from Cairo to Tel Aviv direct only if I start in the city of Alexandria? Surely there must be a way to book the flight from Cairo to Tel Aviv. Second, I investigated this phenomenon and discovered that there is only one way to book this flight through a company called Air Sinai, an Egypt Air affiliate. To book a direct flight from Cairo to Tel Aviv requires you to contact Air Sinai customer service directly with the flight number, date, and time you would like to travel. However, the only way I could have discovered that this flight existed was by happening to find it by searching for flights from Alexandria to Tel Aviv. In addition, when I finally found a way to contact the airline online, the email address was a Hotmail account. Seriously, the customer service email address for Air Sinai is airsinai_tlv@hotmail.com. Lastly, and the ultimate icing on the cake, is that the request from the Hotmail account is to wire money to a bank account plus a $35 transfer charge via Western Union and to send a copy of my passport via email. Thinking I'd soon be claiming $5 million from some long-lost uncle in Nigeria, only to discover my identity had been stolen, that I'm suddenly wanted in Russia for some kind of human trafficking, I decided against wiring money and sending my passport to a Hotmail address. Third, upon further investigation, I realized that there was another way to book the direct flight from Cairo to Tel Aviv. This involved going directly to an Egypt Air counter and telling them the flight number and date I wanted. Again, the only way to stumble across this information was when searching for an indirect flight from Alexandria. As a matter of fact, entering TEL, which is the airport number for Tel Aviv, in the website for Egypt Air was not even an option. When I went to the Egypt Air counter in Athens, Greece, they told me that they were not permitted to sell me the ticket. The only way to purchase the ticket was to wire the money to the account sent in the Hotmail email or to visit the Egypt Air counter in Cairo. So immediately after landing in Cairo from Athens, I went to the Egypt Air ticket counter and bought a direct ticket from Cairo to Tel Aviv. Before entering Israel, I investigated the website of the CEA. It's a habit of mine. Here are some of their tips and tricks. While Israel and Hamas continued to observe the temporary ceasefire that ended the Gaza conflict in 2014, sporadic mortar or rocket fire and corresponding Israeli military response continued to occur. Learn the location of the nearest bomb shelter or hardened shelter. Within Israel and the West Bank, a rise in political and religious tension beginning in October 2015 led to a spike in violence in which U.S. citizens were killed and wounded. Attacks were carried out using knives, vehicles, and guns. Israeli security forces reacted with deadly force, which resulted in bystanders being killed or injured in crossfire. Sites with significant religious meaning to multiple faiths can be subject to violent protests or security incidents with little to no warning, especially on or around significant religious holidays. Of course, I'm in town during Thanksgiving 2016. To board the plane, all passengers must take a transport bus onto the tarmac. As we pulled up to the plane, I noticed that none of our bags had been loaded onto the plane. Rather, the entire checked luggage was waiting on the tarmac to be claimed one by one by each passenger boarding the plane. This was a security measure to make sure no extra luggage boarded the plane, likely to avoid a repeat of Egypt Air Flight 804 or Metrojet Flight 9268, both of which were taken down by bombs. After landing in Israel, all passengers are requested to check in at the immigration office. This is standard procedure. Here they check passports, etc. Usually this takes about 5 minutes or so. They take your picture, sometimes ask your fingerprints, ask your father's name, etc. Not this time. They asked me a series of questions about my family, questions that they could not possibly have known the answers to, since I had not provided them with any of that info. After answering, they told me that I was not permitted to enter the country and that I needed to take a seat in a waiting room. In the waiting room was an international group of bored and confused individuals with no idea for what they were waiting. I left the room and asked a nearby clerk, "What am I waiting for?" The answer, "We need to interview you. Wait in there." After about 45 minutes, I was asked to follow me and was escorted to another, even smaller room. I was asked to sit at a chair in front of a white office desk. Behind the desk sat a man behind a computer screen. To my right, near the ceiling, hung a picture of Benjamin Netanyahu, and to the right of that picture, back at desk level, sat another gentleman. All three were wearing professional attire, and there I sat for over an hour, essentially answering, "Who is your daddy, and what does he do?" So this is what it looks like in Israel, in a city called Jaffa, right? So this is what it might look like if you go to the beach, and if you were to go down the little stairs there, this is what it looks like. This part of the beach, you can see Tel Aviv here in the back. And so Tel Aviv is actually a really like cutting edge city. A lot of stuff going on, very excellent nightlife, lots of events being planned, multiple universities established around the city. This is us back in the hostel enjoying a Thanksgiving dinner. So they put a Thanksgiving dinner together because they get a lot of American tourists, and also because who doesn't like to eat? I mean, come on. This is the lab. This is Karen again. I showed you her picture earlier. This is the lab that she's working in Tel Aviv. And this is what her reactor looks like. So it's a lot like my reactor, except just half of it's missing because instead of using liquid for a cathode, they're using air. But it's essentially the same kind of research. This is another individual doing research there. He's looking at how we can use algae or cyanobacteria to make fuel, right? I'm sure a lot of you have heard about that going on at ASU. Same exact kind of research is going on in Tel Aviv, except they have these really cool big sacks that they're growing everything in instead of glass jars. This is one of the labs that I visited after giving my presentation in Israel. And as you can see, there are a lot of parallels here to my trip to Pakistan. Same research, same kind of people doing the research, similar experience. Okay. So now I have a blog entry from Israel. And like I said, I'm probably going to go a little over because I planned for an hour and a half and I started around 10:30, but if you have to leave, you can. So this one is called In Israel. I'll give everyone a minute to shuffle around. Okay. So in Israel, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam join for a Thanksgiving feast. It says, humans are all searching for similar fundamental... Excuse me, let me get some water first. Humans are all searching for similar fundamental truths. People want a purpose, a reason, a motivation behind their actions. For many people, the answers to these questions come through their religion. I'm not going to forget this time. For many people, the answers to these questions come through their religion and their connection to that religion. Surely with religion, people find community, tradition, understanding. People find friends with common experiences, desires, hopes, and dreams. With religion, we are told we can find reason. We can live a purpose-driven life. And our populace seems to be complacent, usually, reserving ideas like purpose and reason for the religious, excluding them entirely from science. As Hamill and Green so eloquently professed in their book, The Future of Management, religious faith is not chiefly concerned with the what, how, and when of natural phenomenon, but rather it is concerned with the why of existence. And while a few scientists may argue that the question of why is unanswerable and therefore not worth pursuing, they haven't yet convinced the rest of humanity to suspend its search for significance. And for this reason, scientists, researchers, and professionals often have difficulty seeing the purpose or the connection that their research has with their community. For many outside science, the perception of a scientist is often somewhere along the lines of, wow, it must feel great to be working on something that actually impacts humanity. But the scientists don't necessarily feel that way. I cannot even count the number of scientists I have met on my journey that feel completely lost in terms of finding passion, purpose, or reason. These things, they say, are reserved for religion and philosophy. I know researchers and scientists that have literally had mental breakdowns because they feel so isolated and so disconnected while working long hours alone in dark basements. And when people tell them how great their job must be due to its impact, they feel even worse. The fact that they do not see the impact, that they do not find the purpose, makes them feel guilty, makes them feel like they're taking the opportunity for granted. And can we blame them? Often their bosses are so caught up in their own work that they're incapable of spending the time required to be empathetic with them. How is an employee or student going to feel connected to the outside world if they cannot even connect to researchers in their lab? Academic science is missing an essential quality. It's missing humanity. In a research lab, our purpose is to publish, but for what reason, we're not really sure. Thus, in the sciences, we have a lack of place, a lack of community, and a lack of purpose. These same scientists often wonder how it is that people can become religious, and then how it is that some of these people can become religious fanatics. The feelings of isolation that occur as a result of being a reclusive secular scientist are the same feelings of isolation that can occur as an individual without purpose in an increasingly mechanized and impersonal world. How is it that people become religious fanatics? Probably the same way scientists do, as we saw in Aurora or with Ted Kaczynski. Fanaticism is not secular or non-secular. People that have no connection are going to lash out and commit destructive acts regardless of their religious affiliation or lack thereof. The unfortunate scenario we have in our current popular culture is that everyone is attempting to find community or connection by pointing out the faults of other communities. We isolate ourselves from perpetrators and each other rather than focus on the common issues that lead to the fanaticism we see in people motivated by science, politics, or religion. We focus too much on the symptoms of our isolation and the lack of purpose rather than the underlying cause. We can no longer continue to pretend that purpose and reason are reserved for those who are religious, and we can no longer pretend that merely practicing religious acts gives us purpose or reason. The religious must take the time to think about who it is they are and what purpose it is they give their actions and their lives. Religious indoctrination is not the same as religious or personal spirituality, and this is the great misconception of our generation. We currently live in a new scientific revolution. Every time we debate religion, we debate within a completely materialistic framework. When Bill Nye debated Ken Ham, did the audience really get an intelligent discussion about purpose or meaning or spirituality or community? No. The audience got two people talking at one another about their perceived materialistic reality of the world. What on earth does that have anything to do with purpose or meaning or spirituality or community? That was not a debate about religion or purpose. That was two people who were essentially ignoring one another, professing their viewpoint on the material world. This is too often the debate when it comes to discussions about science and religion. Scientists like to focus on criticizing a very specific and scientifically invalid materialistic worldview, which is held by a very small portion of fundamental Christians, and then pretend the conversation ends there. Well, they believe the earth is 10,000 years old. They worship the tooth fairy. Sure, some do, but that's not what religion is all about. Scientists are not concerned with why. Scientists believe existence is all an accident. Scientists adhere to a nihilistic worldview. Sure, some do, but that is not what science is all about. Honestly, do we really accept that at least 3,000 years of human philosophy since the Greeks can all be summed up into either worshiping a flying spaghetti monster or not worshiping anything at all? Surely there must be something to our desire as a species to find purpose and meaning, something beyond splitting hairs about the reality of the material world that I could observe in a lab. Surely there is something to our desire to connect and form community, like this congregation here. We have this tendency to turn each other into scarecrows and attack surrogates, rather than humanizing one another and engaging in real conversations. Whether it's Lawrence Krauss subtly implying that Christians are charlatans before he has the opportunity to talk to one, or Richard Dawkins telling everyone who disagrees with him to go fuck off, we are all too eager to attack one another and distance ourselves rather than actually listen. This is a good part of the reason why an anti-science religious right has developed in the US. Even with the morally unjustifiable comments made by the president, even when his statements make the Pope doubt his Christianity, you still see a loud outpouring of Christian support. Why? Because intellectual Democrats are not believed to be interested in or empathizing with them. The assumption is that intellectuals believe they are charlatans and should go fuck themselves. Thus, people like Ben Stein can make statements claiming that there is a conspiracy in academia to keep the religions out of science, and people go on believing him. And in this context, it is not very surprising to see an anti-intellectual right that disagrees with climate change, evolution, and environmental conservation. Our current trajectory is not sustainable. We cannot afford to continue perpetuating the myth that purpose and meaning are reserved for the religious, while the scientists must remain completely blind to purpose and meaning. And if you have yet to find purpose and meaning, that is completely acceptable, because purpose and meaning were not created with the cosmos and is not preordained or a priori. Purpose and meaning are things which we must find for ourselves empirically and dictate onto the earth a posteriori. This is our ultimate act of empirical discovery. This is a journey that takes time. This is a journey that requires an immense amount of struggle. And this is a journey that can be catalyzed by bringing together religious and secular philosophies to have conversations with one another that are empathetic to humanity's common desire to find community and purpose through its actions. We must be cognizant of the intellectual and political divides that we create, often subconsciously, and actively work to remove those divides. We must break down our walls and allow ourselves to be vulnerable and to be challenged by other worldviews. A positive example of starting this kind of dialogue is the work of a Yale professor called Mary Evelyn Tucker, who has started a field called religious ecology. Mary understands that people that are interested in environmental engineering and environmentalism are fueled by the same fundamental desire to preserve the earth as are many religious theologians. And this simple realization has enabled her to begin a dialogue about how the scientific facts we gain about the impacts of humans on the planet can help guide religious populations make morally intelligent choices about how they interact with the world. It is this kind of dialogue which enabled Pope Francis to write an encyclical about climate change and present the Roman Catholic faith with a moral justification for acting in ways which limit climate change and encourage development of a healthy earth. As scientists and intellectuals, we can choose to remain in our palaces of knowledge and look down upon the ignorant masses, or we can leave that pretentiousness behind us and embrace the knowledge and qualities that our neighbors have to offer us. Rather than radicalizing an increasingly anti-scientific right, we can communicate with members of our community, not only to help them understand us, but more importantly, to make an honest effort to understand them. And through this, we can start to think about the impact of not only reaching 16 million academics or 500,000 secularists worldwide, but also the impact of reaching 2.2 billion Christians, 1.6 billion Muslims, and 16 million Jews that make up the major Abrahamic religions on earth. If I had the opportunity, I would ask every theologian and secularist, if we are all to have a unique and personal experience with God, and if those experiences are different from individual to individual and personally meaningful to us, then when we sit down to meditate or pray, if we do, are we finding God or are we finding ourselves? And how on earth are we to know the difference? So that was, yes, 10 minutes. Okay. So,
Give or take.
I'll let you pick what you get next. So now I'm going to Tel Aviv to India. I'll just do the March for Science, I guess, and we can do the, you can do the wrap up later. So then I went from Tel Aviv to India. And when I was in India, there was a friend of mine that I knew there who was interested in investing in the research that I was doing because we were trying to commercialize it. And he said, hey, I know some people that you might be interested in talking to. And I said, okay, who do you know? And he said, oh, I know these people at the UN. Would you like to go talk to them? I'm like, yes, that's great. Awesome, let's go. Right? So we go to the UN in New Delhi, and I'm talking to these two guys. And they, we're talking about what we're going to do wastewater treatment. We're going to provide access to clean drinking water or clean water for these people, and we're going to do it in a sustainable way. And they tell me, and I'm in India now in December of last year, so 1 year ago. Right? So a lot changed in just the weeks leading up to this meeting. And they say, how do we know that America is going to fulfill its half of the obligation? And I go, what happened? Yeah. I believe they described the president as a bull in a china shop. Okay. So I'm there, I'm in India, I have this meeting with the UN, I fly back, and now I'm in Washington, D.C. And I'm in Washington, D.C. for two reasons. The first one is I'm going to give a lecture at the Office of Naval Research. Because at the Office of Naval Research, if you can imagine the picture I was showing you earlier of my cell, so this is the same thing, except now you have the left part of the cell, the right part of the cell, in the middle. So they're doing the same technology, only this technology can go to the bottom of a waterbed, and now it can generate current from the organics that are in the waterbed and use that current to drive an underwater sensor. Essentially what they're doing there. This is me with the lab at Washington, D.C. There's another excellent story about me. When I came to Washington, D.C., I was actually coming from South America, and the story, that airport story is like one. But we don't have time for that. So I'll talk to you about the March for Science, and I won't get to the last one, but that's okay. This is going to kind of wrap everything up, but we can talk about that at lunch. So this is Isaac Asimov quote, which I love. It's, the nations may be divided in everything else, but they all share a single body of science. Okay. So the current political struggles that we confront are not new struggles, but rather are the same struggles which we have been fighting to overcome since the inception of the U.S. The time for passing blame to either baby boomers or millennials or other generations is behind us. We can no longer afford to convince ourselves that we are divided ideologically, and we must recognize that neither generation is entitled to greatness that we have as a nation, and that both generations are laying the groundwork and writing the narrative of America's story. The gross overreach of the NSA, revealed by the Snowden leaks in 2013, is very much the same narrative as John Raines and Bonnie Raines of the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI in 1971, which revealed the corruption of the government-sponsored COINTELPRO, an organization which attempted to assassinate Martin Luther King and assassinated Fred Hampton and Mark Clark of the Black Panthers. Black Lives Matter, the preeminent civil rights movement of the 21st century, is fighting for the same rights and freedoms for people of color that did the Black Panthers nearly 50 years ago. And they are facing the same governmental counter-tactics from the Department of Homeland Security that were imposed by COINTELPRO. We see women marching in Washington, D.C. and all around the world in support of their right to exist with equal rights to men, even after our great-grandmothers and grandfathers fought for women's suffrage that led to the ratification of the 19th Amendment nearly 100 years ago. And the same people of color and Catholics that were and the same as people of color and Catholics were marginalized by the KKK leading up to and during the era of JFK, as immigration limits since the 1800s have been set on blacks and Asians through the Page Act of 1875, the Chinese through the Chinese Exclusion Act, the handicapped through the Immigration Act of 1907, women marrying foreigners through the Expiration Act of 1907, Arabs, Eastern Europeans, Southern Europeans, Jews, Italians, and all other non-U.S. citizens with the Emergency Quota Act of 1921 and the Immigration Act of 1924, and the Japanese with Executive Order 9066 in 1942, so now are Muslims marginalized by the same governmental institutions in Executive Orders 13769, 13780, and Presidential Proclamation 9645. These are not new struggles. All generations have fought and continue fighting for the freedoms and liberties that we appreciate. And as always has been, these freedoms and liberties are at stake. And to preserve those freedoms and to progress our American experiment, it is necessary that we continue to fight, to struggle, and to build for the preservation and expansion of those freedoms. We must not only wish but insist on the equal treatment of individuals based on our constitutional guarantee of these freedoms. This must be achieved via nonviolent ends and not remain ignorant to the dire consequences of violent actions in our nation's past. As citizens of Earth, we must respect, acknowledge, appreciate, and gain insight from what our generations have done before us and confront old struggles in a new framework. Although our history books may be written from the perspective of world leaders, or may be told from the perspective of world leaders, it is written by the actions of its citizens. And the citizens of the U.S. have always and always will band together to bring about social change. We are more than a vote on an election day. We are a force that will influence our neighborhoods today and motivate voters during the election cycle tomorrow. Therefore, it is paramount that we use our energy to come together now to ensure that those who are not privileged enough to have the opportunities to earn a place at the bargaining table are granted those opportunities. My method for supporting the underserved and the underrepresented is granting them access to science, discovery, logic, ego, empathy, and understanding. Not to give them the earth, but to empower them with the opportunity to discover and define it for themselves. And we cannot do this as scientists or artists or engineers alone. We can only accomplish this together. Thus, the incorporation of non-scientists into the narrative of science is essential. Our citizens must understand what it is we do and why it is important, or else they will continue to be coerced by phonies selling snake oils and get great again quick schemes. Science must be as easy to consume as a cheeseburger. A vote at the polling booth, which is supported by scientific fact, needs to be as simple as ordering a supersized Big Mac. Let's consume science and get fat on facts. The March for Science took place on Earth Day, a relatively new phenomenon in the U.S., which was enacted through the efforts of citizens who took to the streets with an idea. On April 22nd, 1970, the U.S. commemorated the first Earth Day. Influenced by massive destruction in the 1969 Santa Barbara oil spill and inspired by the anti-war movement at the time, a 24-hour national teach-in on the environment was organized via peaceful promotion and demonstration. The collaboration of the scientific and political community brought forth an event which encouraged 20 million Americans to fill the streets and demonstrate for policies to encourage a healthy and sustainable environment based on observable scientific facts. This event brought together many environmental advocacy groups that, although were fighting for different environmental causes, shared many similar environmental ideologies. The collective peaceful action of farmers, scientists, college students, artists, activists, politicians, labor unions, and businesses alike led to the foundation of the Environmental Protection Agency, the passage of the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Endangered Species Act, all during the Richard Nixon administration. This is one example of the triumph of the will of the people over the tyranny of alternative facts. Science has no patience for alternative facts and excludes them by virtue of its method. The earth has no time for alternative facts, as each day they're ignored, the solutions and effects of massive global climate change grow direr and increasingly expensive. With legislation like H.R. 637, Stopping EPA Overreach Act of 2017, much of the protections we earned by fighting for a clean environment are at stake. We have the facts and solutions to write a better future. On an earth where scientific facts are perceived as political statements, what choice do we have? Now is the time to band together. Now is the time to take a stand for science. And with that, I'll have to end there because we're out of time. I'm open to any questions you might have, and I'll let the slides go in the back while you're asking.
Actually, we are very short on time, so I hate to do this, but I think you have another 50 slides to cover at lunch, right? We'll have to do the questions at lunch, but I want to thank you so much for giving this talk, and I get the privilege of mugging you today.